In this section, we will examine ritual in the Vedic social imaginary. What is a social imaginary? A social imaginary is a series of concepts. It's a social construction. It is ultimately the values, the institutions, and the laws, as well as the symbols by which people imagine or create their understanding of their place in society or in a group. So it's not necessarily the physical institutions, but the understanding of those institutions, the concept of those institutions, and how those relate to an individual's understanding with the rest of the group. This goes as well for the system of values, laws, and symbols that apply. So if we're thinking about a social imaginary for Vedic religion, how is it constructed? What are the values, institutions, laws, and symbols of Vedic society? Or what were they? Now, there are very substantial debates over interpretations of the Vedas. We have 4 sections of the Vedas, and much of the material here I'm going to focus on is just the Rig Veda, just to get at the very most basic level. According to some interpretations, the focus is on engaging with others with awareness and working towards reducing our hunger and fear. Here, hunger might be a little bit metaphorical. So high hunger and fear nourish aham. Perhaps we could interpret this as kind of like ego. They take us away from divinity or the Atma. That said, they include a certain set of values. So you might want to be practicing these sets of values. You might want to practice a concept called non-stealing, truthfulness, honesty, compassion. Then you also have non-violence, which would be a later core Hindu moral concept to a certain extent, although this does not mean that historically there are no Hindus who are violent. That is absolutely not the case. Obviously, you have empires and kings and so forth that, and queens that become quite violent in history, right? So, nonetheless, these are sort of ideals. In other interpretations, the Vedas teach us to pursue truth, to accept nothing but the truth which is won through the wise, and describe it in various ways. Ekam sad vipra bahuda vadanti. That truth, or sat, is synonymous with being and becoming, with life and living, in all its manifestations. Rita, or truth, the opposite of untruth. Untruth is anrita. Rita is a cosmic law that holds the entire creation together, all of the creations. Any transgression of Rita in this understanding is punishable by Varuna, the dispenser of divine justice. Above both gods and humans, Rita provides the basis of karma that binds one to its consequence. This applies to you and applies to all living things in this understanding. Knowing knowledge is Veda. Veti iti Veda. That is, from the Vedas one can know the code of right activity and the body of right knowledge. This is another interpretation. The Vedas teach one's duties from birth through death. They describe one's rights, duties, obligations, and responsibilities in all stages of life. The student, the householder, the recluse or the ascetic, and the monk, the monastic ascetic. In order to make plain the Vedic dicta and axioms and understandings of these enable us to understand the meaning and the purpose of the do's and don'ts of the world. The Vedangas, the Puranas, and the epics texts appear only later, as they do later in our course, in of course time. So if one is eager to grasp one's own significance and true reality, one has to understand the importance of these later explanatory compositions also from a Hindu perspective. This is why the previous Vedic religions, from a Hindu perspective, taught the Vedangas and other related texts even before peoples learned the Vedas sometimes. So sometimes the later texts are taught first, but here we're learning about the earlier texts first to keep the historical trajectory. Whatever may be the diversity in contents and commentators, most interpretations do seem to agree that there is essential teaching that seems to be the sort of basic root matter of all four Vedas. The sections dealing with rites, modes of worship, and conclusions of inquiry help to achieve four goals of life: dharma, wealth or artha, desire or kama, and liberation or moksha. So these are four basic understandings that are still present in the Vedas. We do nonetheless have a concept of maybe not institutes or institutions, but social structures that are present in the Vedas as well, through detailed study of the texts in their memorized form. The basic social unit was probably the family structure, kinship structure, which seems to be relatively patriarchal. And man was identified by the clan to which he belonged as well, and then family by association to that individual man. People gave their primary loyalty to a group, a clan, or maybe a tribe, which was called a jana. The term jana occurs in about 275 places in the Rig Veda, and the term janapada, or territory or kingdom, is not used even once. So jana appears to be the sort of root term here that is not ascribed to territory. The jana was split into vish, or clan, and is mentioned, vish is mentioned 170 times in the Rig Veda. Probably the vish was divided into grama, or smaller tribal units for fighting and organization. Although we understand the term grama to be village today, it might not be grama in that sense in the Vedic period. When the gramas clashed with one another, it caused a sangram, or samgram, which was essentially the way we understand war. Because there's a generally patriarchal bent to the Vedic society, the birth of a son was desired again and again and again and again and again. And especially people prayed to the gods for brave sons, it seems, to fight in wars. In the Rig Veda, there's no desire expressed for daughters, oddly enough, though the desire for children, broadly construed, and cattle is a recurrent theme in the hymns. Great affection and respect was generally shown to a guest, atithi, in the Vedas. It was elevated to the rank of a religious duty and included as one of the 5 great daily sacrifices, or the Pancha Mahayajnas. The clans mentioned in the Rig Veda are described as, generally speaking, the way we would use the terms semi-nomadic today, pastoralists. During the Rig Vedic period, they formed a warrior-based society engaging in endemic warfare that was absolutely brutal, and specific types of warfare, even specified as cattle raids, gavishti. These cattle raids and endemic wars, sangrama, among themselves and against external enemies, are the reason that society was subdivided into jana and vish and grama, for organizing, for self-defense. Each of these villages probably had several families, and the settlements were headed by a tribal chief called a Raja or a Rajan, which later becomes a word for king. They were assisted by warriors, Kshatra, which later becomes a Kshatriya class, a warrior class. And they were also assisted by a priestly group, the Brahmins. The Pancha Mahayajanas, the 5 yajnas. The rishis, the devas, the pitris, and the bhutas, and the guests expect help from the householders. If you're a householder, you should perform these 5 sacrifices daily. Teaching and study of scriptures is Brahma Yajna. Tarpana, or offering water to the ancestors, and Sraddha form Pitri Yajna. Homa, or oblations into the fire, is Deva Yajna. Bali, or offering food to all creatures, is Bhuta Yajna. And hospitality to guests is Manushya Yajna, or Atiti Yajna. Brahma Yajna, or Rishi Yajna, is accomplished through studying and teaching the Vedas. Every person should study daily, every man specifically, so it's a gendered duty here. Every man should study daily these sacred scriptures. The males should share the knowledge with others, that's a duty, and this Brahma Yajna or Rishi Yajna is paying the debt to rishis, kind of like paying back student loans or something. Now, Deva Yajna is recognizing the debt due to those who guide nature. So you're paying back those who guide nature and feeding them by offering ghee or uncooked grains into the fire. This is a Homa sacrifice. The Lord Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, which we will study in more depth later, having in ancient times emanated mankind together with sacrifice, the Lord of creation said, "By this shall ye propagate, be this to you the fulfiller of desires. With this nourish you the shining ones, and may the shining ones also nourish you. Thus nourishing one another, you shall reap the highest goods." For nourishment by sacrifice, the shining ones shall bestow upon you the enjoyments you desire. A thief verily is he who enjoys what is given to him without returning anything. So you don't want to be a thief. You want to give back to the gods. The righteous who eats the remains of the sacrifice are freed from all sins. So after you give the sacrifice, if there's a little bit left over, you can eat that and you get freed from sins or bad karma. Then the unpious who cook for their own sake, they verily eat sin. If you don't give offerings and you're just eating for yourself, then you will somehow create bad karma or bad karma. As a source of the notion of Dharma, only 3 of the 4 types of texts in the Vedas have behavioral precepts. So historian and religious studies scholar Lingat notes, for the Hindu, all belief takes its source and its justification from the Shruti or the Vedas. Consequently, every rule of the Dharma must find its foundation in the Vedas. Strictly speaking, the Samhitas do not even include a single precept which could be used directly as a rule of conduct. One can find only references to usage which falls within the scope of Dharma. By contrast, the Brahmanas, the Aranyakas, and the Upanishads contain numerous precepts which propound rules governing behavior. So you have, for example, ahimsa, practice non-injury, truthfulness, satya, adhere to truthfulness, refrain from lying, and betraying promises. Asteya or asteya, non-stealing, uphold the virtue of non-stealing, neither thieving, coveting, nor failing to repay debt. Divine conduct, brahmacharya. Practice divine conduct, controlling lust by remaining celibate when single and faithful in marriage. There's some wiggle room there, though, because if we go dig into historical texts, individuals have multiple marriages. Nonetheless, patience, ksharma. Practice patience, steadfastness, triti. Foster steadfastness, overcoming non-perseverance, fear, indecision, and changeableness. Compassion, or daya. Practice compassion. Be honest, arjava. Have a moderate appetite. Mitahara. Be moderate in your appetite, neither eating too much, nor consuming meat, fish, shellfish, fowl, or eggs. Purity, saucha. Uphold the ethic of purity. Remorse, free. Allow yourself the expression of remorse. Contentment, santosha. Nurture contentment, seeking joy and serenity in life. Giving, or dana. Be generous to a fault. Faith, astikya. Cultivate an unshakable understanding of truth. This is not necessarily like belief system, but an understanding of any type of truth as interpreted within Vedic concepts. There's quite a lot of flexibility there. And then worship is Vara Pujana. Cultivate devotion through daily practices, worship and meditation. Then there's scriptural listening, Siddhanta, Sravana. Eagerly hear the scriptures. And then cognition, mati, develop an understanding of them. Sacred vows, vrata, embrace religious vows and observances. Recitation, japa, chant your holy mantra daily. Austerity, tapas, practice with serious discipline, penance, and sacrifice. Be ardent in meditation and also pilgrimage. In certain cases in the Vedas, deities themselves are personifications of natural forces. For instance, Agni, fire, Vayu, wind, Surya, sun, and Prithvi, earth. The swastik is a symbol connoting general auspiciousness. It is pictured here on the upper left side of the slide and should not be confused with the German Hakenkreuz. The swastik is a representation of the soul, the truth, the stability, and also Surya, the sun. Its rotation in 4 directions has been used to represent many ideas, but primarily describes the 4 directions. The 4 Vedas are represented by the swastik and their harmonious whole. Its use in Hinduism dates back to, we think, early Vedic times, but we're not quite sure. Certainly by the time we have the Upanishads, so late Vedas. Another important symbol, which you are probably familiar with, the Om symbol, is a sacred symbol that represents the universe and the ultimate reality of the Brahman. It's pictured here in a number of scripts, including the Balinese script in the second from the end and the Tibetan script on the end on the right-hand side, but you're probably more familiar with the Devanagari version. The Om symbol is prefixed and sometimes suffixed to all Vedic mantras and prayers. Om is often said to be a representation of divinities in 3 aspects: A, or A, Brahman, U, or Vishnu, and Ma, or Shiva. This is creation, sustenance, and protection, or destruction, closing off with silence. As the divine primordial vibration, Om, it represents the ultimate reality, underlying and encompassing all of nature and all of existence. The writing of the symbol Om, called the Omkara, serves as a deeply significant and distinctly recognizable symbol for the Hindu Dharma. The distinction recognizable for the Dharma in this case is the pronunciation of the Om symbol, which is simultaneously used for meditation and focusing meditation. The Om symbol is both symbolically equated with and also symbolically representative of all of the process of the universe from creation through destruction. Another important Vedic symbol is the protector god Vishnu. Now Vishnu is portrayed here in a later understanding. But in the Vedas, Vishnu is one of three aspects of a series of gods, representing sort of Surya, the sun in three stages. Vishnu represents the rising, zenith, and setting of the sun. The Vedic Vishnu strides through the heavens in these three steps: rising, zenith, and setting. This is Vishnu's great deed and constitutes his great glory. With these three steps, Vishnu, the solar deity, courses through the three divisions of the universe, the god being manifest in threefold form as Agni on earth, as Indra or Vayu in the atmosphere, and Surya in the sky. Vishnu is said to have taken these three steps for the preservation and the benefit of all mortal beings. The zenith is appropriately called Vishnu's palace. His third step cannot be seen with human eyes. It is here that Indra dwells. Okay, so for your post, let's have 4 threads. Why is conceiving of the social imaginary of the Vedic religion important? Pick one of the concepts to focus on and then explain its importance. If somebody else has already jumped on that thread, simply reply directly to them and then bounce your idea off their idea and keep the discussion going. And that will be all for this week, and then we'll add more soon.